What if throughout your life you had repeated a phrase from Jesus without realizing that it hid a spiritual key much deeper than it seems? What if when Jesus said, "Knock, and it will be opened to you," he wasn't just talking about asking for a blessing, receiving a miracle, getting an answer, or waiting for an external door to open before your eyes? What if that door was never outside? What if the hidden door of God, the one that almost no one has found, was hidden within the soul itself? This is one of the best-known phrases in Jesus' teaching, but perhaps it is also one of the most misunderstood. Many repeat it in moments of pain, fear, need, despair. Many think that knocking is just praying for money, healing, solution, deliverance, prosperity, or a visible sign from heaven. And yes, many people approach God exactly like this, looking for an answer to what weighs on their heart. But in the Gnostic reading, this phrase seems to open a much more mysterious dimension. She doesn't just talk about a material door. It points to an inner passage, a secret opening of consciousness, a hidden access to the kingdom of God that Jesus announced, but that few really understood. Because think with me, what is this door that needs to be knocked? Where is she? Who closed it? Why do so many people spend their entire lives searching for God, attending temples, listening to sacred words, repeating prayers, following rituals, reading verses, but they continue to feel a deep emptiness within themselves? Maybe the problem isn't in Jesus' promise. Maybe the problem is where the human being is hitting. Because many knock on the door of the world hoping to find God. They knock on the door of approval, of external religion, of fear, of guilt, of spiritual appearance. But Jesus seemed to point to something quieter, more intimate, more hidden. God's hidden door is not a door made of wood, stone, or gold. She is not in a temple built by human hands, nor behind a visible altar, nor in some secret place guarded by religious authorities. This door is symbolic. It represents the passage between the sleeping man and the awakened soul. It represents the point where the mind stops seeking only external answers and begins to realize that there is a divine light hidden within. In Gnostic revelation, this door is the boundary between ignorance and awakening, between the false self and the inner Christ, between the life lived on the surface and the kingdom of God that begins to reveal itself within the being. And maybe that's why this phrase bothers so much when we look at it in depth, because it forces each person to ask, am I really knocking on the right door? Am I seeking God as a living presence or just as a solution to my problems? Am I looking to walk through a spiritual door or just receive something from the outside? This question changes everything, because Jesus did not just teach an appearance of faith. He spoke of transformation, of inner rebirth, of eyes that open, of ears that listen, of a kingdom that cannot be found by those who only look outside. So before we go any further, pay attention to one thing. Perhaps the biggest revelation in this sentence is not the fact that the door opens. Maybe it's the secret to finding out where to hit. Because if the soul hits the wrong place, it could spend years waiting for an answer that never comes. But when she finds the hidden door, something begins to stir inside, as if an ancient truth is calling her name. And that's exactly when the mystery begins to deepen. We are living in days when prophecies are being fulfilled before our eyes. But the majority still walk in darkness, trapped in incomplete truths that have been carefully hidden from humanity over the centuries. Now think, what if precisely what was taken from the scriptures contained answers that you have been looking for years? Answers that can illuminate your path, strengthen your faith, and reveal the true purpose of Jesus' coming. Therefore, I prepared this powerful digital book for you, Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed. This book is not just a read, it is a spiritual awakening, a tool made for those who want to go beyond the surface, free themselves from manipulation, and reconnect with the authentic Christ. Without filters, without distortions, and without human interests. By purchasing this material, you not only access a hidden truth, but you also directly support my work and the continuation of this independent research, allowing this message to continue reaching more people. Download right now. The link is available in the first pinned comment. But be careful, as it contains spiritually sensitive information. This material can be removed from the air at any time. Guarantee your access while I read it. NK is still active. If you are ready for this awakening, come back here and write Amen. That will be your leap of faith, and today God can open a door you never knew was about to open. And as this mystery begins to get deeper, one question needs to be asked very sincerely. What did Jesus really mean by knock? Because at first glance, it seems simple. It just seems like an order to insist on prayer, to ask in faith, to not give up until God answers. And for a long time, that was exactly how many people understood this phrase. They were taught to knock like someone begging, like someone knocking on a closed door hoping that someone on the other side will have compassion and open it. But when we enter into the spiritual language of Jesus, and especially when we look at this phrase from a Gnostic perspective, we realize that knocking is not just speaking nice words to God. Beating is a state of the soul. Knocking is not just repeating a prayer with your lips while your heart remains asleep. Knocking is not just asking for a miracle today, an answer tomorrow, a blessing later. Crashing is when something inside the person starts to feel restless. This is when the soul begins to realize that the life it lives on the surface can no longer answer the deeper questions. It's when a person looks at everything they've learned, everything they've heard, all the certainty they've received since they were children, and still feels like there's something missing. This emptiness is not just sadness. Often this emptiness is the first sign that the soul is approaching a door, because there is a huge difference between asking and knocking. Asking can be born out of necessity. Beating is born from awakening. Asking can come from fear. Knocking comes from the inner hunger for God. Asking may just be the desire to solve an external problem. But knocking, in the spiritual language of Jesus, is when consciousness begins to touch the mystery. This is when the person no longer just wants to receive something from God, but wants to truly know God. And this change is powerful because it separates an appearance of faith from a real quest. Many ask. Few knock. Many repeat words. Few approach the hidden door with their entire soul. In the Gnostic view, knocking is the movement of consciousness trying to penetrate the veil of ignorance. This veil is everything that prevents human beings from seeing the divine light within themselves. It is the veil of fear, of guilt, of illusion, of distraction, of outward religion, of the noisy mind, of the false self that believes it is separate from God. And while this veil is before the inner eyes, the person even talks about God, even hears about Jesus, even knows verses, even frequents sacred places, but remains outside. It is close to words, but far from experience. She knows the phrase, knock, and it will be opened to you. But she still doesn't understand where the door is. This is why knocking spiritually is deeper than simply insisting. Of course there is insistence, but it is not an empty, desperate, mechanical insistence. It is a conscious insistence. It is the soul saying, I no longer want to live on appearance alone. I don't want a shallow faith anymore. I no longer want to seek God only when I am suffering. I want to cross. I want to understand. I want to wake up. This is the kind of beat that begins to echo in the unseen world. Because when the soul beats like this, it is not just asking heaven to change something outside of it. She is facing her own transformation. And perhaps this is where a lot of people get lost. Because many want God to open an external door, but they don't want Him to touch the internal doors. They want God to open an opportunity, but they don't want Him to open their conscience. They want God to change their circumstances, but they don't want to face the shadows hidden within themselves. They want a quick answer, but they don't want to go through the awakening process. But the door of God, this hidden door that Jesus seems to indicate, does not open to superficial curiosity. It opens to the soul that is willing to be transformed. It opens up to those who have the courage to ask, what in me is still closed to God? Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention, stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. Crashing is when the soul begins to question. And this questioning is not empty rebellion, it's true thirst. This is when a person begins to look at their own life and realize that many things they called faith were just customary. Many things I called obedience were just fear. Many things I called spirituality were just repetition. Then, suddenly, a silent question arises within her. Is there anything beyond that? And this question, when it actually arises, is already a knock on the door. Because every deep search begins when a person stops accepting ready-made answers and begins to desire a living revelation. Hitting is also when the person no longer accepts superficial answers. She hears beautiful phrases, but feels that they no longer touch the depths of her soul. She hears common explanations but realizes that Jesus was talking about something bigger, something hidden, something that cannot be reduced just to external rules. She begins to realize that the kingdom of God cannot be just a distant promise, nor just a place for after death. There is something in Jesus' teaching that points to a present, interior, living, secret reality. And when this perception begins to dawn, the soul beats harder because it is no longer satisfied with staying in the outer courtyard of mystery. She wants to go in. Crashing is when there is an inner hunger for God, not a hunger for religion, for spiritual status, for appearing holy, for winning arguments, for feeling superior to others. It's a hunger for presence. It's hunger for light. It's a hunger for meaning. It's when a person feels that nothing in this world can fill the space that exists within them. Neither achievements, nor distractions, nor applause, nor human promises. She may even have things on the outside, but inside she feels like there is a closed door. And that closed door starts calling. It's as if something inside her says, "There is more. There is a truth you have not yet touched. There is a hidden kingdom you have not yet accessed." And in the Gnostic revelation, this hunger is not a defect. She is a sign. It is the sign that the divine spark within the human being is trying to awaken. The monad, this deep spiritual origin, begins to remember that it does not belong only to the world of matter, of appearance, of mental prison. She begins to miss the light, and this longing becomes a search. This search turns into a hit. This beat becomes movement, and this movement begins to bring the soul closer to the hidden door of God. Therefore, when Jesus says knock, perhaps he is speaking to that deepest part of the human being, that part that still remembers God even when the mind has forgotten. But there is something even more delicate. Knocking requires inner silence, because no one can hear the door opening while they are completely overwhelmed by the noise of the world. The world screams all the time. It screams desires, fears, rush, comparison, guilt, anxiety, distraction. And the longer a person lives trapped in this noise, the more distant they become from the inner voice. Jesus often pointed to deep listening, to eyes that see and ears that hear. But it's not just about the physical eyes or ears of the body. This is spiritual perception. The door begins to reveal itself when a person learns to listen to what does not make noise, when they begin to realize that God can speak in silence, in consciousness, in the light hidden in the heart. Therefore, hitting also means stopping running away from yourself. Because many people want to find God, but they don't want to go inside themselves. And that happens because the interior is scary. There are the wounds, the questions, the guilt, the hidden desires, the old pains, the masks that the false self built to survive. But the hidden door is not on the surface. It is precisely in that deepest place, where the soul needs to descend to then ascend. In Gnostic language, the inner descent is not perdition, it's revelation. This is when the person begins to see the invisible chains that held them back without them realizing it. And when she sees it, she begins to free herself. Knocking is this spiritual gesture of approach. It's not breaking down the door. It's not forcing God. It's not trying to control the mystery. It's playing with reverence. It is coming to the truth with humility. It is recognizing that the common mind cannot alone open what belongs to the spiritual world. This is why the door does not open to pride. Don't open up to those who think they already know everything. It is not open to those who use God only as an argument. The door begins to move when the soul becomes sincere. When she says, I don't want to just repeat what I've been told. I want to understand. I want to be transformed. I want to find the light that Jesus revealed. And maybe now you begin to see why this phrase is so powerful. Knock, and it will be opened to you is not just a pretty promise. It is a call to come out of spiritual passivity. Jesus didn't just say wait. He said to seek, ask, and knock. In other words, there is movement. There is demand. There is a crossing. The soul needs to rise from sleep. It needs to get off the surface. You need to stop living just as someone who listens to stories about God and start becoming someone who walks towards the living experience of God. And this experience, in the Gnostic reading, begins when consciousness realizes that the kingdom is not simply far away, at some inaccessible point in the world, is but hidden like a seed within one's own being. So when Jesus talks about knocking, he is talking about an inner action. It is consciousness touching the boundary between the old man and the new man. It is the soul touching the invisible wall that separates ignorance from spiritual knowledge. It is the Christ within calling from within, while the person believes he is calling from without. This is the great paradox. The person thinks they are knocking on a distant door, but perhaps the real knock is happening inside. Maybe every sincere question, every silent tear, every deep longing for God, every moment she grew tired of the world's lies, was a knock on the hidden door. And if that makes sense to you, keep this phrase: I'm knocking on the right door. Because this sentence can be more than a comment. It can be a statement of your own quest. Comment, I am knocking on the right door, if you feel that your soul no longer accepts superficial answers. Or comment, the hidden door, if you want us to delve even deeper into this mystery, because now that we understand what it means to knock, we need to ask something even more important. Where is this door that Jesus promised would be opened? And now we come to the question that completely changes the way we hear this phrase from Jesus. Where is that door? Because when he said, knock, and it will be opened to you, the human mind immediately imagines a door outside, an external passage, a visible path, something that is before the eyes and that needs to be opened by some force coming from outside. But what if this image is just the surface of the teaching? What if Jesus was using symbolic language to reveal a much deeper reality? The door that Jesus revealed was not before our eyes. It was hidden in the center of being. This is the great spiritual twist of this mystery. Because for centuries, many people have looked for this door in external places. They searched in temples, in rituals, in rules, in religious authorities, in traditions, in signs in the sky, in prophecies, in human promises, in places considered sacred, in objects, in symbols, in ancient books, in words repeated without conscience. And I'm not saying these things can't have value. The problem is when human beings transform all of this into the final destination, when they believe that God is tied to an external form, a construction, an institution, a human permission, because Jesus seemed to point to something that goes beyond all this. He spoke of a kingdom that does not depend only on physical eyes to be seen. He spoke of a truth that needs to be perceived from within. Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention, stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. The hidden door is not an ordinary door. It represents the entrance to the inner world. It is access to the secret place where the soul begins to remember its divine origin. It is the hidden point where the human being stops looking for God as just a distant idea and begins to feel the presence of God as a living reality. In the Gnostic reading, this door is the passage from ignorance to spiritual knowledge, from the sleep of consciousness to the awakening of the divine spark, from the false self to the inner Christ. It is as if within man there was an invisible temple, not made of stones, not built by human hands but formed by the very light that God placed in the depths of the soul. And that's why many people don't find this door. Not because it doesn't exist, but because they were taught to only look outside. They were taught to look for God like someone looking for a lost object in the outside world. They look in one place, then another. They look for one voice, then another. They look for one promise, then another. They look for ready-made formulas, quick answers, easy explanations. But the door remains hidden because it does not reveal itself to those who look only with the eyes of matter. It begins to reveal itself when the person enters into themselves sincerely, when they stop running away from their own interior and realize that the greatest altar can be in the silence of consciousness. This idea is very strong because it changes everything. If the door is within, then the search for God is not just a race after external signs. It's a return journey. It's back to the center. It is to descend to the deepest place of the soul, where the divine light was covered by fear, guilt, distraction, pride, wounds, false beliefs, and illusions of the world. In the Gnostic view, human beings often live as someone who has forgotten who they are. He identifies with appearance, with name, with body, with history, with pain, with the opinions of others, with fleeting desires. This is the false self. And while the false self rules, the door remains hidden, because the false self does not want to go through the door. He wants to control the outside. But when the soul begins to awaken, something different happens. The person begins to realize that there is a presence within them that does not belong to the noise of the world. There is a silent light, a deeper awareness, a hunger for God that no material thing can erase. This light is like an old memory. She doesn't scream, but calls. It does not force, but attracts. She does not appear to feed the ego, but to lead the soul back to the truth. And the more a person listens to this light, the more he understands that the hidden door of God does not open with human strength, nor with spiritual appearance, nor with religious pride. It opens when the heart begins to become true to the mystery. Think about it calmly. How many people spend their entire lives asking God to open doors outside of them, but never ask God to open what is closed inside? They ask to open a door of opportunity, but not a door of conscience. They ask to open a door of conquest, but not a door of transformation. They ask to open a door of victory, but not a real door. And perhaps that's why many answers seem to take a long time. Maybe it's not because God is far away. Maybe it's because the soul is still knocking on doors that don't lead to the kingdom. Doors of fear, doors of the ego, doors of anxiety, doors of spiritual vanity, doors of empty promises, doors that appear sacred on the outside, but do not lead to the center of being. When Jesus speaks of this opening, he is revealing a crossing. The door is a symbol of the passage between two states of consciousness. On one side is the sleeping man, who lives trapped in the outside world, seeking approval, security, quick answers, and visible signs. On the other side is the awakened soul, which begins to recognize that God was not just somewhere far away, but hidden as a presence, as light, as life within one's own being. This passage is not imaginary. She is spiritual. This is when faith stops being just repetition and begins to become experience. This is when prayer stops being just a request and starts to become an encounter. This is when the Bible stops being just a text read with the eyes and begins to become a mirror for conscience. And here comes a very important key. The hidden door does not lead to an escape from the world, but to a new way of seeing the world. When that door starts to open, the person doesn't necessarily see something spectacular outside. Often the first change happens inside. She begins to realize what she didn't realize before. You begin to see your own internal prisons. You begin to notice when you are being guided by fear, guilt, anger, vanity, comparison, the need for approval. You begin to understand that many chains were not in your hands, but in your mind. Many prisons were not around, but inside. And this realization is painful, but also liberating, because no one crosses the door of light without first noticing the shadows that block that entrance. In the Gnostic reading, this door is the point where the soul awakens to its divine origin. Not in the sense of pride, not in the sense of placing oneself above others, but in the sense of recognizing that there is a spark of God hidden within the human being. This spark is like a buried flame. The world throws dust, fear, distraction, sin, guilt, confusion, false doctrines, empty desires upon her. But she doesn't die. She remains there, waiting for the moment when consciousness begins to hit. And when a person really hits, when they search deeply, when they stop being satisfied with shallow answers, that flame begins to grow, and the door begins to be perceived. That's why Jesus wasn't just talking about an external reward. He was revealing a process. First, the soul feels that something is missing. Then she searches. Then she knocks. Then she discovers that the door was not where she imagined. And when you discover this, the true path begins. Because finding the door doesn't mean simply walking through. It means recognizing that there is an entrance, a passage, an opening. It means realizing that God is not just a theory taught by others, but a presence that needs to be experienced. And this presence begins to transform the person inside, dismantling what was false, illuminating what was hidden, bringing to the surface truths that the soul tried to hide for a long time. This is where the false self begins to fall. And perhaps this is one of the most difficult parts of the hidden door, because many people want the light, but don't want to give up the mask. He wants God, but he wants to keep the character he built intact. You desire the kingdom, but you are still in love with the prisons of the ego. But the door is narrow because it doesn't allow me may everything pass. Pride doesn't go away easily. The inner lie does not pass. The appearance doesn't go away. Spiritual vanity does not pass away. The desire to control God does not pass. The hidden door asks for truth. Order delivery. Ask for silence. Ask for courage to let go of what prevents the soul from recognizing the divine presence. And when the mind starts to shut up, something sacred happens. Because the common mind lives trying to explain God, control God, limit God, place God within formulas and ready-made answers. But the hidden door does not open through the mind alone. It opens when the entire being becomes available, when the heart calms down, when consciousness turns inward, when a person stops running from one distraction to another and starts listening to the inner call. It is there in this profound silence that the presence of God ceases to be a theory. It begins to become experience. One does not just hear about the light, she begins to perceive the light acting within her. Don't just hear about the Christ, you begin to feel the Christ within, awakening your consciousness. And perhaps this is the big difference between knowing the phrase and living the phrase. Knowing the phrase is saying, knock and it will be open to you, like a beautiful promise. Living the phrase is realizing that there is a door within you that needs to be touched with awareness. To know the phrase is to expect something to happen outside. Living the phrase is allowing God to open what was closed inside. Knowing the phrase means repeating it. Living the phrase is crossing. And when a person begins to understand this, they never look at this teaching the same way again, because they realize that Jesus was not just giving a simple answer to human problems. He was handing over a key to the awakening of the soul. Comment, the door is inside, if you feel this word touched something deep within you. And also comment, I want to cross, if you realize that perhaps you have spent a lot of time looking outside for what God hid in the center of your own soul. Because now that we've begun to understand where that door is, we need to face an even stronger question. If the door was inside the whole time, why has almost no one been able to find it? And this question needs to bother you a little. If the door was inside the whole time, why was almost no one able to find it? Why do so many people know Jesus' phrase, repeat, knock, and it will be opened to you, believe in it, sing about it, preach about it, write about it, but continue to live as if they were in front of a closed door? Why do so many seek God for years and still feel that there is a distance, a silence, an invisible wall between the soul and the divine presence? Perhaps the answer is harsh but necessary. Many have never found this door because they spent their entire lives knocking in the wrong place. Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed, now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention, stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. This is one of the most profound parts of the teaching. Because the problem is not always a lack of faith. Many times a person has faith. She believes in God, she believes in Jesus, she believes in the scriptures, she believes in the power of prayer. But even so, he continues to look outside for what Jesus indicated within. She looks for the door in external places, in ready answers, in human promises, in visible signs, in religious approval, in spiritual authority, in repeated rituals, in external movements. And the more you look outside, the further you move away from the center. It's like someone who walks many paths, visits many places, hears many voices, but never stops long enough to hear the silent call that comes from within. Many seek God just out of fear, And fear can even make someone start a search, but it hardly leads the soul to the deepest door. Because when a person seeks God just out of fear, they don't necessarily want transformation. She wants protection. She doesn't want to go through a spiritual door. She wants to escape pain. She doesn't want to know the truth. She wants to feel safe. And there is a huge difference between seeking God for the love of light and seeking God just to escape the darkness. Fear screams but does not always awaken. Fear runs but it doesn't always enter. Fear asks for help, but often it doesn't want to be transformed from within. And God's hidden door is not just an escape hatch for the desperate soul. It is a passage to a new consciousness. Others are just looking for rewards. They want God to open doors of money, doors of success, doors of recognition, doors of victory, doors of comfort, doors of advantage. They transform Jesus' phrase into a formula for external conquest, as if "knock and open will go to you" was just a promise to receive what the ego desires. But what if Jesus was talking about something much bigger than that? What if the door he promised to open was not first the door of reward, but the door of revelation? Because the external reward can even arrive, and yet the soul remains lost. A person can receive things, achieve things, overcome things, and still continue without going through the hidden door. They can have a lot on the outside and remain empty inside. This is why the Gnostic reading of this teaching is so provocative. It takes the phrase from the surface level and places it before consciousness. She asks, "Are you knocking because you want God or because you just want God to fulfill your desires? Are you seeking divine presence or just a benefit? Do you want to cross over into a deeper inner life, or do you just want the outside world to be more comfortable?" This question is uncomfortable because it reveals the intention hidden in the heart. And perhaps the door will not open to the soul as long as the soul is trying to use God as an instrument of the false self. Because the false self also prays. The false self also asks. The false self also speaks sacred words. But he doesn't want to die. He wants to receive, win, appear, control, possess. And the hidden door does not open to feed what needs to fall. Many want answers, but they don't want transformation. This is perhaps one of the biggest reasons why the door remains closed. The person asks, "God, why did this happen? God, what should I do? God, where is the exit?" But when the answer demands inner change, she retreats. When the answer touches pride, it closes down. When the answer asks for forgiveness, silence, humility, detachment, renunciation of the ego, it looks for another, easier path, and then it keeps knocking on doors that promise quick answers but don't demand real transformation. But the door of God is not just a door of information, it is a door of transfiguration. Whoever approaches her is not just given a sentence to understand, receives a light that begins to reveal everything that was hidden, and that is precisely what many avoid. Because finding the hidden door means allowing God to illuminate inner places that a person would rather keep closed. It means looking at old wounds, masks, intentions, guilt, vanities, fears, disordered desires, illusions that seemed like truths. It means recognizing that not all suffering comes from outside. Sometimes there is a prison within one's own consciousness. And this recognition is difficult. That is why many prefer an external spirituality, a spirituality of appearance, a spirituality where there is a lot of talk about God, but the transformation of the soul is avoided. It is easier to discuss religion than to enter into silence. It's easier to point out mistakes in others than to see the shadows within yourself. It is easier to repeat, "Lord, open the door," than to ask, "Lord, what in me still prevents this door from revealing itself?" Many knock on the door of the world, but not on the door of the soul. They knock on the door of approval, wanting to be seen as spiritual. They knock on the door of vanity, wanting to appear chosen. They knock on the door of anxiety, wanting immediate answers. They knock on the door of comparison, wanting to prove that they know more, that they believe more, that they deserve more. They knock on the door of distractions, trying to fill the void with noise that only the divine presence can touch. And so the soul gets tired. Because she knocks, but doesn't realize that she is in front of doors that don't lead to the kingdom. Some doors even open, but they lead to more confusion. Others seem luminous, but only feed the ego. Others promise God but distance the person from their own center. In the Gnostic vision, the great obstacle is inner blindness. Not a blindness of the eyes, but of the conscience. Human beings can see the whole world and still not see themselves. You can know many sacred texts and still not perceive the light hidden in your own soul. You can listen to many preachings and still not hear the inner voice. You can talk about Jesus every day and still not understand the path that Jesus pointed out. This blindness is subtle because it often disguises itself as certainty. The person thinks they already know. They think they already understand. They think they have already arrived. And precisely because they think they have already arrived, they stop searching in depth. And whoever stops on the surface never finds the hidden door. Inner blindness traps the soul in noise. And noise is one of the greatest prisons of our time. Noise of thoughts, noise of fear, noise of opinions, noise of desires, noise of guilt, noise of rush, noise of distraction. The person wakes up and is already surrounded by voices. Voices telling her what she should want, what she should buy, what she should look like, who she should be afraid of, who she should compare herself to, what she should prove. And in the midst of so many voices, God's voice seems distant. But maybe she's not far away. Maybe it's just stuffy. Perhaps the door is not closed from the outside, but covered with layers of noise from the inside. And here there is a very profound detail. The door remains closed not because God does not want to open it, but because the soul has not yet learned where to knock. This sentence needs to be felt calmly. God is not playing hide and seek from the sincere soul. The divine light is not distant due to cruelty. The problem is that consciousness is often disoriented. She was trained to seek outside, to depend on external signs, to obey fear, to confuse emotion with presence, appearance with truth, external religion with the internal kingdom. So the soul even searches, but it searches without direction. She even asks, but she asks from the false self. She even knocks, but she knocks on doors built by her own illusion. And external illusions are strong. They say that God is always somewhere far away, always in an authority outside of you, always in a future promise, always in an experience that another needs to validate. They make a person believe that the kingdom of God is only something for later, never something that begins now in the depths of consciousness. They make the person live waiting for a great external event, while ignoring the small internal call that appears in silence, in the restlessness of the soul, in the thirst for truth, in the desire to awaken. And so many pass through the door without recognizing it, because they expected something grand before their eyes, but the door presented itself as a subtle change within the heart. The ego also prevents entry, because the ego doesn't want to hit. He wants to have it opened. He doesn't want to approach with humility. He wants to possess the key. He doesn't want to cross over transformed. He wants to cross carrying his masks. And the hidden door doesn't work like that. It is not opened by spiritual arrogance. It is not opened by those who use God's name to feel superior. It is not opened by those who want the light without abandoning the shadow. The ego can memorize phrases from Jesus. It can quote verses. It can dress in religiosity. It can appear devout. But it trembles before the true door, because it knows that if it opens, many internal lies will be undone. That's why so many people know the phrase but never understood its meaning. Knowing a phrase is not the same as entering into the mystery. Repeating "hit" is not the same as hitting with your soul. Saying "it will be opened to you" is not the same as being prepared for what will be revealed when the door opens. Because when the door opens, it doesn't just open a beautiful path. It also opens up a deeper view of yourself. The person begins to see how much they lived tied to external expectations. You begin to realize how many times you have confused God with your own projections. You begin to understand that seeking the kingdom requires an honesty that is not always comfortable. And perhaps that's why many prefer to remain outside, calling the door a mystery, but without the courage to go through it. God's hidden door requires an awakened soul, or at least a soul willing to awaken. And this disposition begins when the person gets tired of shallow answers. When you realize that it is not enough to hear about God, you need to turn to God with your entire being. When you understand that true prayer is not just words thrown to heaven, but interior opening. When you realize that Jesus was not teaching an empty technique, but revealing a way of returning to the center, to the inner kingdom, to the hidden light, to the Christ that awakens within consciousness. And at that point, the question stops being just, why doesn't God open? And it becomes, what in me is still hitting the wrong place? And if this word touched you, comment, I don't want to hit in the wrong place anymore. Also write, the door of the soul. If you feel that God is calling your consciousness to a deeper search, beyond fear, beyond ego, beyond just external religion. Because now that we understand why so many don't find that door, we need to move forward to the most delicate moment of all. The moment when the door begins to open, and the soul realizes that something inside it will never be the same again. And that's when everything starts to change. Because the hidden door of God does not open like an ordinary door. It does not open with noise, with spectacle, with applause, with external signs that everyone can see. Often, it begins to open silently, deep in the soul, in a place that no one around notices. On the outside, the person may appear the same. Keep living, working, walking, talking, listening, facing your days. But inside, something starts to move. A different restlessness is born. A deeper thirst appears. A discreet light begins to penetrate the cracks of consciousness. And the soul realizes, even without being able to explain it, that there is something beyond material life. This is the beginning of the opening. It's not just getting a response. It's not just getting what you asked for. It's not just seeing a problem being solved, Vito. It's much deeper. This is when a person begins to feel that life cannot be summed up in what one sees, what one buys, what one achieves, what one loses, what others think, what the world promises. Suddenly, what once seemed enough starts to seem small. The distractions that used to fill time no longer feed the soul. Easy answers no longer convince. Human promises are no longer enough. And this sensation, which many confuse with emptiness, could be precisely the sign that the door has started to move from the inside. Because when the door begins to open, the soul begins to hear a call that was previously muffled. It's not an ordinary voice. It's not always an audible phrase. It's a perception. It's as if something inside says, you were created for more than this. There is a light hidden within you. There is a presence that you have not yet fully recognized. There is a kingdom that is not as far away as you thought. And at that moment, the person begins to understand that Jesus was not just delivering a phrase to be repeated in times of need. He was revealing a path of awakening. Knock, and it will be opened to you, begins to stop being just an external promise and becomes a spiritual key. Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention, stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. The door opens when prayer stops being repetition and becomes presence. This is a very strong change. Before, the person may have prayed only with words, repeating phrases, asking for things, trying to convince God, trying to get an answer. But then there comes a time when the prayer changes. It gets deeper, less anxious, less noisy. The soul no longer just wants to talk. She wants to find it. You no longer want to just ask. She wants to stay. You no longer just want quick answers. She wants to be touched by the divine presence. And when prayer becomes presence, something inside calms down. The heart stops desperately knocking on the doors of the world and begins to turn towards the door of the soul. This is a very clear sign of inner awakening. When a person begins to realize that God is not just someone distant to whom he sends requests, but a living presence that begins to illuminate his own consciousness. Then prayer stops being an attempt to escape pain and becomes a place of encounter. It stops being just a list of needs and becomes an opening. The person enters in silence but leaves different. Sometimes you don't get the answer you wanted, but you receive a peace you didn't expect. Sometimes the problem is still there, but the way of looking at it has changed. Sometimes nothing changed outside, but inside, something began to come into order. And that's how the door opens, first from the inside. The door begins to open when silence speaks louder than the world. And this is very profound because the world does everything to keep the soul distracted. The world offers noise, rush, comparison, fear, desire, anxiety, guilt, vanity, excess information, excess opinions, excess promises. Everything draws attention outward. Everything tries to prevent the person from stopping and listening. But when consciousness awakens, it begins to realize that there is a kind of silence that is not empty. It is a silence full of presence, a silence that does not abandon but reveals, a silence where the soul begins to hear what was hidden beneath the noise. In Gnostic revelation, this silence is a door, because it is in the inner silence that the divine spark begins to be perceived. While the mind is agitated, the person becomes confused with his thoughts. You think it's just your fears, your memories, your guilt, your pain, your desires. But when the mind begins to become silent, a deeper presence appears. Not as pride, not as fantasy, not as spiritual superiority, but as a sacred memory. The soul begins to recognize that it is not just matter. It is not just body. It is not just history. It is not just wound. There is in her a light that came from God, a hidden origin, a deep part that still remembers the Father. And perhaps this is where the strongest phrase needs to enter the heart. The door opens when the soul stops begging on the outside and recognizes that it carries the key inside. This key is not arrogance. It is not to say that man does not need God. On the contrary, it is recognizing that God has placed a point of contact with light within the soul. It is understanding that the search is not just running away but returning to the center. It is realizing that Jesus was not pointing to an impossible distance but to a hidden reality that needed to be awakened. The key is awareness. The key is living faith. The key is the divine spark beginning to awaken. The key is, Chris, I am interior, calling the soul to cross. When this key awakens, the person begins to see signs that they did not see before. Not necessarily spectacular signs in the sky, but signs within life itself. She begins to notice patterns that hold her back. Realize when you are being guided by fear. Realize when you are seeking approval. You realize when you are trying to fill an internal absence with external things. Percebe quando sua oração nasce mais da ansiedade do que da confiança. Realize when you are using God just to reinforce the false self. E essa percepção pode doer, mas é uma dor que liberta, porque a luz não revela para destruir. Reveals to heal, awaken and lead. É nesse momento que o falso eu começa a perder força. The mask starts to crack. A pessoa já não consegue fingir para si mesma com a mesma facilidade. Aquilo que antes parecia normal começa a incomodar. Certain desires lose their luster. Certain words lose their meaning. Certain external searches start to seem empty. Not because the person has become cold, but because the soul is changing direction. She is no longer living only on the surface and is starting to move towards the center. And the closer you get to the center, the more you realize that the true door was never hidden from God. It was hidden to the sleeping consciousness itself. When the door begins to open, the person also realizes that God was not far away. This discovery is one of the most exciting, because for a long time, perhaps she felt like she needed to scream to be heard, prove herself to be accepted, suffer to be noticed, deserve to be loved. Mas pouco a pouco, a alma começa a compreender que a presença divina sempre esteve mais perto do que imaginava, not as a weak idea, but as a living reality. God was not just the final destination of the search. God was also the silent light that sustained her during her search. He was present even when the person thought they were alone at the door. And that changes the way of living. A person no longer seeks God only in desperation. She begins to seek God also in consciousness, in silence, in truth, in humility, in presence. You no longer just wait for something to fall from the sky. She begins to realize what needs to be opened within her. You no longer just ask, God, why won't this door open? Now ask, God, what do you want to open in me? And this question is powerful because it takes the soul out of the position of spiritual victim and puts it on the path to awakening. The person stops expecting just an external miracle and starts allowing an inner miracle. In the Gnostic view, this is the beginning of the return. The soul begins to remember that there is a divine origin behind forgetfulness. The spark begins to respond to the call of light. The inner Christ begins to illuminate places that were closed. The mind begins to understand that it cannot control everything. The heart begins to surrender. And the door, which previously seemed distant, begins to seem intimate. So intimate, it's scary, because the person realizes that their entire life they may have looked in many places for what was being called within them from the beginning. But it's important to understand, the door doesn't open all at once. Inner awakening is a process. First comes the restlessness, then comes the search, then comes silence, then comes perception, then comes the courage to look inside, then comes the fall of illusions, then comes presence. And at each stage, the soul needs to keep beating, but now not like someone who is lost on the outside. Now it knocks like someone who has heard the sound of a key moving inside. She knows there's something there. You know that Jesus' promise was not empty. You know the door exists. You know that there is a passage between the old state of consciousness and a deeper life in God. So when the opening begins, don't just expect big external signs. Watch what happens inside. Notice when your prayer becomes truer. Notice when silence begins to call you. Notice when certain illusions lose their strength. Notice when you feel like seeking God not out of fear, but out of love for the truth. Notice when the phrase, "knock and it will be open to you," stops being just a familiar phrase and starts to feel like a direct instruction to your soul. This is the moment when the door begins to reveal itself, not as an object before the eyes, but as a sacred passage within consciousness. And if you feel that this door has started to move within you, comment, "The key is in me." If this word spoke to your soul, also write, "The door began to open," because this helps this video reach other people who are also seeking this Gnostic revelation of Jesus. And now we need to move on to the strongest part of all. What happens to the soul when it finally crosses that door and realizes that it will never again be able to see God, Jesus, the inner kingdom, and life itself in the same way? And now we come to the deepest part of this mystery. What happens to the soul when this door begins to open? Because the open door doesn't just mean receiving an answer. It doesn't just mean seeing a problem solved. It doesn't just mean getting what was asked for in prayer. When Jesus said, "Knock and it will be open to you," he was pointing to something much greater than a temporary solution. He was revealing a spiritual passage, a path of return to the Father, an inner opening that changes the way a person sees God, sees Jesus, sees themselves, and sees their own life. Whoever crosses this door never comes back the same, because after the soul touches the truth, it can no longer live satisfied with its appearance. This is the revelation that many don't realize. God's hidden door does not open just to show something outside. It opens to reveal what was hidden inside. When this door opens, the person begins to see differently. She looks at life and realizes that for a long time she lived looking for external signs, quick answers, human promises, approval, security, religion only on the outside. But Jesus' call was deeper. He wasn't just saying, "Ask for things and you will receive." He was saying, "Seek the truth, touch the mystery, awaken the conscience, step through the door." And this crossing changes everything, because the person begins to realize that God was not just a distant idea. God was the presence that called the soul from the beginning. When someone crosses that door, faith stops being just repetition. Faith is no longer just an inheritance received, a memorized phrase, a religious custom, an automatic response. It begins to become a living experience. People no longer talk about God just because they heard about it. She begins to feel that there is a presence working within her, illuminating the mind, breaking masks, revealing wounds, awakening a deeper thirst. And this doesn't happen superficially. It is as if the light of God enters places that have been closed for a long time, places that the person hid even from themselves. And when this light enters, it does not enter to condemn the sincere soul, but to free that which was trapped beneath fear, guilt, ego, and illusion. In the Gnostic revelation, to cross the door is to begin to see beyond the veil of the mind. This veil is everything that made the person believe that they were separated from God, far from the light, lost forever, dependent only on external responses. The veil of the mind creates confusion. It makes the human being identify only with the body, with the pain, with the past, with the mistakes, with the desires, with the image that he built to be accepted. But when the door opens, the soul realizes that there is something deeper than all that. There is a hidden divine spark, an inner light, a sacred origin that has not been destroyed by the world. And when this spark begins to awaken, the person understands that Jesus did not come just to talk about a distant God, but to reveal the way back to the Father. And that way back is not just geographic, it is not a physical road, it is not a wooden door in some ancient temple. It is a change of consciousness. It is an interior passage. It is when the human being stops living just as someone who asks from the outside and begins to recognize that the key was hidden in the very center of the soul. The key is not pride. It's not self-sufficiency. It's not saying you don't need God. On the contrary, the key is to realize that God placed within man an ability to respond to light. The key is awakening consciousness. The key is the Christ within calling. The key is the soul ceasing to run away from itself and returning to the place where the divine presence has always been calling in silence. Therefore, when the door opens, the person can no longer look at Jesus as just a distant figure from the past. She begins to perceive Jesus as a teacher of the soul, as a revealer of the inner kingdom, as the one who pointed to a truth that many have heard, but few have crossed. Jesus was not just promising outside help. He was revealing an entrance to the hidden kingdom, to the inner truth, to the divine presence that had always been hidden beneath the veil of the mind. And when this understanding is born, the phrase "knock and it will be open to you" stops seeming simple. It becomes a spiritual key. It becomes a map. It becomes a calling. But crossing this door also requires courage, because the light that enters does not only illuminate what is beautiful, it also reveals what was hidden. The person begins to realize how many times they sought God out of fear, how many times they prayed just for reward, how many times they asked for answers but refused transformation, how many times they confused the kingdom of God with their own desires, how many times they knocked on the door of the world and not on the door of the soul. This perception may be strong. It may be inconvenient modding, can change everything the person believed they knew. But that's exactly why it sets you free. Because no one is transformed by a truth they never had the courage to see. When the door opens, the false self begins to lose control. And the false self does not fall without resistance. He tries to convince the person to return to the surface, to be distracted, to compare themselves, to seek approval, to continue living according to appearance. He tries to say that the inner door doesn't matter, that silence is a waste of time, that the presence of God needs to be proven by external signs, that the soul must continue running after human promises. But when the person actually touches the hidden door, something inside them already knows that they cannot return the same way. She may even try to go back to her old life, but the old life no longer fits in like it used to. Certain illusions lose their shine. Certain answers are small. Certain searches no longer make sense. This is one of the most profound signs that the door has been opened. The person changes inside before everything changes outside. She begins to have another perception. Where before there was only anxiety, discernment begins to emerge. Where before there was only fear, confidence begins to emerge. Where before there was only guilt, true repentance and a desire for light begin to be born. Where before there was only repetition, presence begins to be born. Where before there was only external religion, an inner path begins to emerge. And this does not mean abandoning God, nor abandoning Jesus, nor despising faith. It means to deepen. It means leaving the surface and entering the living mystery that Jesus taught when he spoke of the kingdom, the door, the search, the light, the eyes that see and the ears that hear. And perhaps this is the part that most touches the soul. When the door opens, the person realizes that God was never as far away as they imagined. Often she thought she needed to cross the entire world to find God, when in fact she needed to cross the layers of her own mind. I thought I needed to receive external authorization, when I needed to awaken inner sincerity. I thought I needed to prove my worth to be heard, when I needed to open up to the presence that I was already silently calling to. And then she understands that the hidden door was not a punishment. It was not a cruel secret. It was not God hiding from the soul. It was the sleeping soul looking in the wrong place. This revelation changes prayer, changed the search, changed the way you read Jesus' words. People no longer read "knock and it will be open to you," as if they were just waiting for a door of opportunity. She reads like someone listening to an invitation to awaken. She understands that knocking is touching the border of mystery. Opening is allowing light to enter. Crossing is accepting that one's life is transformed. And after this crossing, it is not possible to continue living as before, because the soul begins to recognize what is true and what is just appearance. You begin to feel when a word has life and when it is just noise. Begin to realize when a search comes from the light and when it comes from the ego. Begin to distinguish the voice of fear from the voice of God in the silence. And here's an idea that needs to be recorded. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not why God didn't open the door. Maybe it's because we've been knocking on the wrong door for so long. Maybe the door was closer than we imagined. Perhaps the key was hidden in a conscience that needed to awaken. Perhaps Jesus was saying, in a symbolic and profound way, that the kingdom of God is not just running outwards, but entering the center of being, where the divine presence awaits the sincere soul. And when this truth is understood, a person stops seeking God only as an answer to his problems and begins to seek God as the very source of life. Because in the end, the open door is not just a promise that something will be delivered. It is a revelation that something will be awakened. The soul awakens to God. Consciousness awakens to the light. The heart awakens to presence. The inner Christ awakens as a living call within the being. And anyone who experiences this understands that "knock and it will be open to you" was not just a nice phrase to console difficult times. It was a sacred instruction. It was Jesus saying that there is a passage, there is an opening, there is a hidden door, but it can only be recognized by those who sincerely search, by those who stop living only on the surface, by those who have the courage to cross their own interior towards the Father. So if this message spoke to your soul, comment now. The door will open. And if you feel like you spent a lot of time hitting the wrong place, also write, "I will cross." Because each comment helps this revelation reach other people who perhaps are also looking for God outside, without realizing that Jesus pointed to a hidden door in the center of the soul. And perhaps today this phrase is coming to you not by chance, but with a call to look again, knock again, seek again, only now in the right place, not at the door of fear, not at the door of the world, not at the door of the ego, but at the hidden door of God where the soul finds the light that never stopped calling it.